Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Health and Wellbeing and Social Care Decision Meeting. I'm Matthew Winnington, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Social Care. Just some housekeeping. First, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria statue in front of the civic offices. There's no members of the public, so I won't do the rest. I will just ask people to introduce themselves around the room. So, Alan, if you can start off, please.
Alan Noble, Development Manager, Public Health Department.
I'm Louise O'Sullivan, Group Accountant for Adult Social Care and Public Health.
Angela Dry, Director of Adult Services.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Councillor Graham Heaney, Labour Group Spokesman on Health and Social Care.
Luke Stubbs, Conservative Group.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 1 on the agenda. Apologies for absence. Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest, members? No. Okay, so without further ado, we'll move on to funding. Item 3, funding for residential rehabilitation social impact bond. So, Alan, over to you. Happy with the windows open? Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So the paper that I've submitted is seeking approval for committing some potential funding towards a pilot social impact bond to deliver some additional drug and alcohol residential rehabilitation. It's seeking a funding contribution up to no more than £100,000, and it's to approve that the source for the pilot be from the Public Health Reserve. At the end of the pilot, a longer term funding source would need to be identified if we were going to continue working with the social impact bond. So in terms of some of the background and the rationale for investing in residential rehabilitation services, both drugs and alcohol have very significant negative impacts on Portsmouth. We estimated that we have over 3,000 alcohol dependent adults in the city, which is the second highest rate in the South East and significantly higher than the England average. But we do have a low penetration rate into treatment, so only around less than 300 people are in treatment, less than 10% of that population in need. With regards to drugs have a wide-ranging impact on the community, not just on the individual themselves, but often because of levels of crime and the organised crime, the violence and exploitation that goes along with drug use and drug addiction. And we estimate we have around 1,500 heroin and crack users in the city, but on the positive side, at least around half of them are in treatment at any one time. But Portsmouth does have one of the highest rates of drug-related deaths in England. So national evidence suggests around 45% of acquisitive crime, that's thefts, burglaries, is committed by heroin and crack users, and that a typical heroin user spends around £1,400 a month on heroin and crack, committing around £26,000 worth of crime. There are benefits of investing in treatment, which I've outlined in the paper, but in terms of some economic modelling that's been done of the benefit, it's roughly £3 to £4 for every pound invested in treatment in the sort of immediate term, but in the longer term it can increase to around £20 per pound invested over 10 years. So wanted to clarify what residential rehabilitation was and what I meant by that. In the case of this paper, it's providing a residential based treatment programme where someone will live within the setting and receive their treatment. It's 24-hour setting, so there's support 24 hours, and the abstinence is the main goal. So it's getting people off of alcohol or illicit drugs. So it's not about maintenance. And there's often a communal living element, and people are focused on recovery and addressing psychological and physical addiction. There's pretty good evidence and it is NICE endorsed that residential treatment should be provided. And NICE particularly focus on residential treatment being provided for people that have significant comorbid physical, mental health and social problems, where our community-based treatment interventions haven't really worked for them. And there is evidence that longer stays in treatment are more effective. In terms of what a residential programme can often entail, there's a period of detoxification followed by a longer period of psychosocial interventions where people are addressing their addictive behaviours. The next stage tends to be about more reintegrating people back into the community, often through voluntary work or other aspects like that, getting them to a point where they hopefully will be work ready. 3.3 outlines the potential cohort within the city. We previously invested significant funds in residential rehabilitation and detoxification, and this funding would help us increase the placements that we currently have available. There will be no difficulty in us identifying the 12 people for this pilot. 3.4, I've done some modelling that looks at the potential cost benefits of how it would compare against our current commissioning arrangements. So based on our current commissioning arrangements, if we were to purchase 12 places of a similar programme with similar dropout rates to what we would experience before, the value that we would be getting would be around £183,000 of treatment for the up to £100,000 that we're going to invest. Partly how this is achieved is because the Department for Culture, Media, Sport are as part of the social impact bond, so for every pound we invest they will invest 35 pence, so we get a little bit more bang for our buck. Essentially what the social impact bond does is it takes the risk away from us. At the moment, if we place someone in treatment, they may well do 12 weeks of treatment, come out, relapse, and we're back to where we were, but we've had to pay for that 12 weeks worth of treatment. With this social impact bond, it puts the risk on the investor who's put the money into it, that if none of them are successful and none have achieved any outcomes, we don't pay anything. So what we've initially said, from the 12 people that would go through treatment, we would consider that potentially 2 would go through to the point where they're in sustainable employment. And that means they will, and I've provided a sort of definition of that, when someone's not on a 0 hours contract, not on short-term contract, and been in employment for more than 3 months. Then we would potentially pay £50,000 for that. We're expecting 2 of those, potentially, from our modelled data. If we get 12, we still only pay for 2. If we get 1, we only pay for 1. So it does, the risks for us are reduced in terms of what we would pay out for this. So the social impact bond, the people going through treatment, it would last them approximately 15 to 24 months from the point of entering the treatment centre to the point of which they're in a job for 3 months or more. So at the point at which the social impact bond is coming to an end, we would be able to assess whether it's been effective or not, whether it's been good value for money or not. I just wanted to, there's a couple of bits, something that's not in the paper, but we're essentially looking at people for this that would be eligible, that are homeless, offending behaviour, high cost individuals to the public sector. If someone were to be in prison, it would be £60,000-70,000 a year to keep them in prison. So if we can avoid some of those, well, we don't, as a council don't necessarily avoid some of those costs, but the public sector avoids those costs, it's potentially a very worthwhile investment. In terms of the longer term situation, as if we would need to consider our overall treatment funding if this was shown to be effective. The longer term treatment, abstinence based treatment, was more effective, and refocusing some of our treatment on that element. The other option is, if we are talking about high cost individuals here, that we take a more cost sharing, risk sharing basis with other public sector bodies that might if they could see that it's effective and it removes people from offending behaviour or high-cost NHS costs, that they may consider on a case-by-case basis investing. I think I'll just take questions if that's...
Thank you, Alan. Luke, question?
Yeah, all right then. So firstly, just, quickly looking through the paper, I mean, who is the counterparty on this? Who is putting up the social impact bond? I know there's reference to DCMS, but that's 35%. So who's covering all the rest of it?
The social investor that's on board is Big Issue Invest. So they would put the money up front, pay the treatment providers for the treatment costs. If they, essentially at this stage for them it's a proof of concept. So it may end up costing them more because we're putting 12 people through. But yeah, they're the ones taking the risk.
So that's the same thing being done elsewhere, because if you're talking about it as a pilot, you only have to do you have to do a pilot in each locality, do you? So has similar things happened elsewhere in the country on that?
Social impact bonds, yes, but not around substance misuse that I'm aware of. This is the only one I'm aware of.
Right, okay. And just a sort of follow-on comment, if I can, which is, it's, I know in the report and in the intro we had, the justification is saving the public sector money, but of course that doesn't actually help paying for a lot of these things. It's a lot of government departments are highly centralised, certainly Justice, DWP, there's no autonomy whatsoever in those systems. There is some in health, there is some in police, but not in the other parts of it. So, it's, it's obviously it's a positive thing, although actually it always sounds easy in principle, doesn't it, that everyone can share in the pain of paying for these things because they all benefit, but I'm not at all convinced that's what's going to end up happening, because it's, it just doesn't tend to.
Thank you, Luke. Graham?
Questions. Just to clarify, you said in paragraph 33, you said many would benefit from residential rehabilitation. Have you got any sort of estimate of what sorts of numbers who might benefit from it at all? Because you said there are over 1,000 services within our system, you said many would benefit from residential rehabilitation. So are we talking about half or a quarter, or what do you think? Any assessment? Oh, it's a rough guess, okay.
Alan, can you put your microphone on?
Apologies. So traditionally in the past we used to invest a lot more in residential treatment and send a lot more people off. So we would have in the past sent well over 100 people through. So that's the level of demand that there could be if it was provided, but obviously we've kind of gate kept it to some extent because of the finances.
And if I remember correctly, because I made some notes of the briefing, but I forgot, I've left the relevant bit of paper at home, but the 371,000 and 700,000, so that was nearly £1 million we were sending on rehabilitation into 13-14, and we're now spending 135,000. That is a correct reading, isn't it?
That's correct.
The final question is, it sort of follows on from what Luke said about the plans at the end. You obviously talk about the potential recommissioning of services in 2021. Obviously, we could decide how we want to buy things, but I'm just wondering, would we consider, or would there be possibility of another social impact bond type process to fund the service as well? Would that be potentially an option, or do we not know yet?
It may well be an option if there may well be a different offer. The offer we've got in terms of the numbers and the costings, that's based on the pilot that we're engaging with up front. So I don't know what, having worked through it over a year or 2 years, the provider of the social impact bond may be revised their processes and their costs. So, but then that, if it's effective, it may well be an option for us how we purchase residential rehabilitation in future, even if it's within our £130,000 budget that we currently have.
Is it okay if I just finish with a comment? Yeah, I welcome this. Obviously, it's an initiative we've got to do because we haven't got much in the way of other ways of doing things, and I fully understand that. And I understand Luke's point about future government funding, but there's been a lot of work to try and get government to realise about the way spending it happens in a place, place-based spending, and that we should think more about that rather than the silos of government departments. But I expect it takes a long time for government to get the message about this sort of stuff, so we might have to wait a long time before that changes.
Thank you, Graham. I've just got a couple of questions. So one towards Louise. In terms of the, we've mentioned about, and Alan alluded to the point at which we would pay out. How would that work in terms of what evidence would the provider have to give to us for us to pay out the 50 if it's just one, or 100,000 if it's two or more people who are going through the service?
So if one person goes successfully through, we will only pay 50,000. If two people are successfully through, then it will be 100,000. So our maximum exposure in terms of monetary value is the 100,000. And I think it is the section about the section 4.3 will cover the requirements for the outcome for us to be deemed that they've been successfully in a role for long enough for us to be able to pay the 50,000 or the 100,000.
Thank you. So just to be absolutely clear, unless they fit every single criteria, as Alan mentioned earlier, we will not pay anything.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah, please, Alan.
So in terms of our contract that we will write, it would specify what we would deem to be meaningful employment, and the things that I've said in terms of over 3 months, not 0 hours contract. They need to provide either a contract or some wage slips that demonstrate that. That would be our evidence.
Am I right as well, Alan, that there's a particular stipulation about they can't work for anyone involved in providing the service?
Indeed, I would write that into the contract, and I've spoken to the providers about that, because a lot of people go through rehab and over a period of time may start volunteering and then working for the rehabs. It would be an incentive, £50,000 worth of incentive to give them a job within the rehab. So that would be one of our stipulations, that it's not the providers involved within this bond.
Thank you very much. So I'll just do my final comments. I mean, I'm very happy to accept the recommendations. I think this is when we were first approached from this, I think we were, I know it was, there was a very different idea on offer in terms of where we would be in terms of paying for things. We would pay for things not at the end, we would pay for things as things went along. And I'm really, so great thanks to Alan and his team, and also finance as well, and with Louise and Richard, to get to the point where we were very clear that under the processes of a social impact bond, it really should be on outcomes. So I think we have to give so the place where we are, that we won't pay anything until we have actual really quite ambitious outcomes for the clients going through, is really down to the work of officers making sure that wasn't the case. Having with myself and the former Director of Public Health, Jason Horsley, really saying that that's the way it should work, and so giving that direction. So but it's a really, I mean, I think anything where we can get real outcomes for people, and even if we get through and someone doesn't get a job, but they're still clean and or sober, depending on what their substance misuse issue is, we won't have to pay anything, but we'll still have someone who's not needing to access their services anymore, that isn't going through addiction. So I think it's a real positive, and I think the important thing, as Alan has also mentioned about the future substance misuse contracts, is that even if we're still in the process of not knowing whether two or more go through, I think I'm right. I'll just ask Alan this. I think I'm right in believing that we could put that into any contract of, if we, as that process won't be at the 24 months by November 2021, we could have that in the contract, that we would review that side of things within that contract time.
Correct, absolutely. We could put a clause in the contract within the specification that this is working its way through, and the fundings, we can flex the service and the budget based on the findings of it.
Thank you. And again, echoing both Graham and Luke's comments regarding national funding and how much benefit we get, I think it's always worth putting on record at this point that central government has decided that drug and alcohol services are not statutory, and that any funding we do is on a basis of we choose to do it, because even though it basically saves all the system, whether it be the justice system or the benefit system or the healthcare system or the prison system, any of those areas, it saves them money, but the burden falls entirely on us, and we have to use our general public health budget to pay for it. And I think it would be much better if we had if it was a statutory service and we had statutory funding for it on an ongoing basis, and didn't have to go down this line. But I do think, as we've got no upfront risk, and we are in control of the process, I think it's a very sensible thing for us to do, and also really give the people who are the most vulnerable, for which this would be the right kind of service, as opposed to out in the community. It gives us that opportunity to actually give people what they need, rather than just what we can provide. So I'll come back to recommendations. So I'm very happy to accept the recommendations of approve a funding contribution towards a social impact bond of no more than £100,000, and approve that the funding source proposed for this pilot would be the Public Health Reserve. At the end of this pilot, a longer term funding source will need to be identified if the service is to be maintained. And actually, if I could add part of that recommendation, and this will all be part of the retendering of the substance misuse contract in November 2021. So with that amendment, very happy to accept those recommendations. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 4. So this is the adult social care, older persons care strategy, and over to you, Angela.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I've got a bit of a grotty throat this afternoon, so I apologise in advance. The purpose of coming here today is just to provide an update of the progress that we're making against the strategy, which members will be aware of. We have got a strategy which we and are anticipating, and financially will bring us into financial balance by the end of 21-22. And that within that, we're changing fundamentally the way that people not only receive services, but how we can do a long-term strategy around getting individuals to look at their own needs much earlier on, and look at what resources are available to support them in their local communities. So we have 5 main aims. One, that we will look at where assistive technology can be used, and that isn't about replacing people automatically with assistive technology, but it's using it where that it can enhance the offer. So one of the examples in the action plan talks about the domiciliary care redesign project. We've used an app on a smartphone where when workers have gone out to individuals, they are able to update the care record onto the app, and obviously with individuals' consent, family members, etc., have access. So if they've rung mum, for example, and can't get through, they would be able to look on the app to see whether or not the carer had been in or not. So that not only adds to an efficiency, but also creates increasing amount of well-being for relatives. We need to make sure that we are working with people's strengths and encouraging them to utilise what's around them in the communities. And again, in the action plan, we talk about community catalyst role, which is one of the new roles that we're going to try during this next 12 months or so. The aim of that role is to work very much with individuals, identifying with them what it is they would like, and then going out to the community to seek providers, individuals, or just the localities that are able to provide those things, and looking at how we can work to really sort of get the communities involved for people. We need to make sure that we're using reablement as a focus for everything that we do, and that ranges from the sort of high-end multi-agency intermediate care type reablement services right to ensuring that somebody who needs a bit of support or retraining to just be able to access basic needs, so getting a drink of water, etc., are supported. In order to deliver all of this, we need to make sure that the market that we commission services from, or the individuals commission services from themselves, are robust and are also able to deliver the outcomes that people want. Clearly, safety is our paramount, and we need to make sure we're safeguarding all our vulnerable adults. We are looking at our own residential in-house services. The size of the estate has reduced dramatically over the last few years, and what we're trying to do is identify through our accommodation strategy what the resources are likely to needed to be both now and into the future, and make sure that anything that we provide delivers high quality and is really effective. Doing all of those things, as I said, should make us sustainable financially by 21-22, and certainly the financial budget plan for next year would show us coming very close to a balanced position by the end of the year with the projects, assuming that the savings identified within those will be achieved. That's happened. We've managed to mitigate that to quite a significant extent, and so I'm reasonably confident that that can be achieved. All of the objectives that we've got and aims that we've got meet the blueprint outlines as well. Sorry. Apologies. I think one of our key bits in the work with partners, particularly Solent NHS Trust, is about looking at how we can do away with multiple assessments and start looking at a single professional going out and doing as much as they can, and other professionals that need to be brought in building on that core assessment. Progress is being made with that, but I'm sure people can appreciate it's quite difficult getting multiple professions within multiple agencies on the same page, but the pilot for the locality work is due to continue to be developed quite soon. I'm assuming people have had an opportunity to go through the action plan, so I just wondered if people will take questions and answer as I go through. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So do you want to go through each section and then just, or did people just want to jump in about any particular points?
Could I suggest that, as Andrew is struggling a bit, that we just ask questions on the bits we're interested in, because I've had a chance to look at this already, and I mean Luke may not have had a chance. I'm happy for Luke, obviously.
I've got a more general question as well, which is about what's happened in regard of money and the transition programme that we had. So, you know, it was been back in, I think, probably about January 17, where I made an agreement with Chris Ward in principle that we were going to take the extra money which the government was giving at that point, which appears to be one-off, and to use that to pay for some of the inevitable double running and friction that you're going to get when making changes. And so that project, I would think, probably expires in April this year. So, and you know, from a financial perspective, I mean, basically, are you making provision to pay for some of these things as you go along? Because there will be some upfront costs in it, or is there some of that money left to be carried over, or what is the situation?
Thank you. So in relation to the Transformation Fund, as you rightly said, a lot of that money was used to start projects and put them in train. What we have done for next year is there has been success clearly in the shutting of Edinburgh House and Hilsey Lodge, which has generated some income or some surplus money, if you like, ahead of the target, because Hilsey Lodge was closed sooner than anticipated. We have met with Chris Ward, Section 151 officer, and there has been an agreement for us to have a reserve created with some of those funds, so that we have a reserve of no more than £1 million that we can draw on over the next 12 months for some of the new projects that are coming through. Within that, we have put quite a robust governance arrangement round it. So all of the projects, like they did previously, have to come through the senior management team, of which the finance manager is on that, as is Louise. We will then, bids are put in and they have to be approved from a business perspective by myself and from a financial sustainability perspective by the finance manager. What we'll then do is review them on a quarterly basis, and any project that isn't delivering the milestones at that time, there is a real chance that it will be stopped. We also have a requirement within the bids for exit and or sustainability strategy, and no project is being agreed unless we know that how it's going to either be funded or exited at the end of the period of time.
To make a quick sort of half comment really on that, which is, and thanks for that answer, and I understand all of that. So, I mean, initially this had 8 million in it, so if you've got 1 million left, we've been spending this at 2 million a year basically, or just a bit more than that, which shows you, what the cost of some of these things is, and I don't think that cost pressure is going to go away. I mean, I think, you should get some benefits coming through from some of these things, but then there'll be other things you want to do, and again, you're going to need, there is an upfront cost to change, and I'm not sure that that's fully allowed for here, so that's, I'm not sure that you've got enough set aside for that on the face of it.
I think what we felt when Richard and I went and spoke to Chris Ward was one of the things we didn't want to do was ask for an unlimited pot of money and be seen to just not really be given due consideration. I think having a reserve with the framework around it will enable us to either demonstrate where it's successful. There are things that are spend to save as well as double running at the front. So I think we didn't go in asking unlimited. I think we just need to, no, I know you're not, but I think we just need to be really, we don't know from year to year what's coming down from central government. I think we're trying to make sure that the projects that we're identifying and the changes to the way we're working are things that can be sustainable if no further money comes down.
Yeah. And I think what I'm suggesting is, because there is, there is extra government money for social care this year, and you would kind of guess that there may well be in the future years. I guess we'll see. And so, whether it might be prudent, rather than just to allocate all of that to different strands within social care, to set some of it aside for some of these upfront costs, because otherwise you create the perverse situation again where managers don't want to make changes because they can't afford to, because they don't have the money in their budget. So in order to keep in track this year, they cause bigger problems down the line, and whether that's something you might want to do in the budget.
Thanks. Just on that point, I think one of the things that we've instigated within the adult social care team, especially the senior managers, is really getting that focus there, rather than nice to do. Actually, this is what's in our strategy and this is what you need to be concentrating on. And I think that's been something that this year in particular, because of the budget pressures and because of, as you say, that effectively the transformation fund is greatly diminished now, that as much as in the past some of the nice to do were nice to do, now it really, everything has to fit into that strategy, and I myself have told the senior management team, and I know that Innes and Angela and Andy have that constant consideration, but also that goes right down through adult social care. So all the team members know that that's the way that we have to approach. Not because that's not an ideal world, because there's, as you say, they're called nice to do because they're nice to do. But in the reality of where we are, having this strategy going forward. And of course, this is the one that we discussed at the conference in December 2018. And we're also looking to next month have a refresh conference again. So the same, with effectively the same people there, about where we are, how we can improve on this, using the whole of the health and care system in the city to work how we can get the most bang for our buck. Because as we've talked about earlier in terms of partnership, I think that's the most important thing, that if we can get a way that we spread this cost and spread the load a bit more, then for the council it's going to have a much less, or it's going to have less financial impact, rather than if we just think we've got to do it all ourselves. I hope that's helpful. Graham.
Well, I'm sticking to my position. Angela's got a tough time, so I'm not proposing to answer any questions because I think I've been through it. And I had a chance to speak to Andy yesterday about something else, so I think you probably deserve a rest, really.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, and obviously you asked quite a few questions at the briefing, so which was very comprehensive. So yeah, I think there's just a few bits and pieces on the things I brought out actually to Luke. I think the ongoing work we're doing in terms of winter pressures and extending that throughout the year, and getting certainly working with the hospitals to try and the rest of the social care systems to try and get that to work has been a real positive, though not without its difficulties, as there often is, but also getting the working together across the city boundary, because obviously when it comes to the hospital we have to deal with Hampshire County as well, and one of the interesting impacts is the way that Southern and Solent are working better together in terms of discharge. The domiciliary care redesign that's currently going on, that we've got in draft at the moment, I think that's been a real paragon of how to work well with our private care providers in the city, but also to get their buy-in as well in the beginning of that systems thinking process. And that's a really good way of just getting people on board rather than doing two. And again, I think this, from that 2018 conference, that really helped, because it started having those conversations and engagement, which just weren't there in the same way before. And then, of course, the most important thing is probably is about looking at where we've got gaps in our provision. And I think, Luke, that's probably the most important thing in terms of future financial sustainability, in having the right provision for the right people at the right time, because A, it's the best thing to do for people, but also it's actually going to save you money, because you're going to have what people need at the time in their lives, rather than the wrong thing, which often costs more because you're not really providing what that person wants and needs. So obviously this report is just for noting, so I'd like to thank Angela and the rest of the adult social care team, and obviously we look forward to the upcoming conference to go over this with the wider work we're doing across the city with Health and Care Portsmouth and beyond. And I really do hope that we will have when we have the next report back for this in 6 months' time or so, that we will be moving further forwards. And who knows, Luke, you might be able to get us a bit more cash from the government. Or maybe ask Penny to do so, I don't know. Well, thank you very much. And that concludes this meeting. Thank you.